Thank you so much to the Texas Society of Architects for hosting this event. This is fantastic. This is a beautiful space, and we're just really happy to be here. We're really honored to be able to present this work to everyone. 5 years ago, we definitely would not have expected we would live sort of jet set lifestyles like this. So if some of the sort of nervous naivete comes out during this lecture, it's because we're still sort of adjusting to this scale of presentation. So thank you all. We're very excited to be the first of the Visionary Voices lectures, and also hope everybody comes to all the rest of them as well. Okay, so my name is Dan Sternoff-Beyer. I am the creative director and co-founder of New American Public Art. I'm joined here with Bevan Weissman, who is the director of fabrication and a co-founder. We have two other members who couldn't be here today. So why are we called New American Public Art? Essentially, that's just what we wanted to see more of. We wanted to see public art in America that basically had a new aesthetic, and we also kind of want to change the way people see American public art. And we think that that public art should have three major qualities. It should be beautifully engineered, it should be interactive, and it should be fully open source. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to make art that is based in engineering. It has a lot of engineering principles. It always has an interactive element, and that all the solutions and technical things that we come up with in creating the art is then open sourced and is given back to the creative economy to basically raise the bar of how art can be produced here in America. Here you see a whole bunch of strange things that we've done. We really don't have a single medium. Our medium is generally just kind of thinking about what interactivity is and how that relates between people. So all of these pieces have something to do with translating the experience of one person to another through the medium, and that medium could be light, it could be sound, it could be giant snow sculptures that people make, it could be like a kiosk type cathedral that you walk in and you hear stories about your local environment and the local scene. It could be text message based things. So we really span a lot of different technology when we try to answer what is interactivity and how does interactivity connect people together. Okay.
So with that focus on interactivity, that's one of the main drivers of what motivates our art. You'll see here these pictures, they don't really focus on the sculpture because that's really not what we focus on primarily. We focus on the people that are going to be using it, the participants that give it life. So that's really one of the central ideas that we start with. What interaction do we want to have? Not what do we want the piece to look like, not how people will photograph with it, but what experience they'll have when they come up to it. So what is interactivity? What is curiosity? What we want to do is we want to make a piece of work that people can feel free to come up with, approach without much barrier, without much hesitation, and exercise that curiosity to explore, to play, to learn something new. So when you stoke this curiosity in the public, it can be a bit of a risk, right? What we're saying basically is, yeah, grab those handles. Yeah, climb on it. Yeah, shake this thing. Yeah, do all the stuff that you're not really supposed to do with art, especially in the gallery world. But we're in the public world. We're outside. We don't really have a lot of rules enforced here. So we want to give people that freedom to play. And when you do that, it involves a certain leap that you may break an unwritten rule, that you might have some sort of social ramification for your actions, and that you basically might lose control of what you had intended. What we hope is that people might actually gain a sense of control through acting this way, that they might feel empowered to indulge their curiosity, that they might feel that their world is one that they can change, one that they can interact with a little bit more, and that's what our art is meant to do.
So through this thinking about interactivity, we've kind of, and also I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the word interactivity. It gets thrown around a lot these days. Everybody wants an interactive piece. Everybody says their piece is interactive. We said all of our pieces were interactive for a long time until we really started thinking about what are we really talking about? And so we made sort of a tighter definition of interactivity for us. So like this piece here, there's a whole bunch of lights above these people, and if you yell at them, they sort of go wild. And maybe that's actually not an interactive piece. We would call that maybe a responsive piece. The piece is responding to something you're doing, like a light switch responds when you're turning on and off. But interactivity is when two people can communicate to each other through the piece. True interactivity only happens between free minds. And maybe you can have an interactive piece with an animal, but that really sort of gets into a philosophical conversation. But this is now what we try to do with our pieces. We want to connect people together through the piece. It's not just responding, it's actually sort of transforming the information. Okay, what are we doing? What are we doing? We are making this piece, which we call Compellin's Owls. So this is going to be, you actually might be familiar with this location already. This is the giant and beautiful butterfly bridge that's down by Shoal Creek. And if we had the renderings of the rest of the city, you'd see the new library in the distance. We just got to see the library for ourselves today, and it was absolutely breathtaking. It is one of the most beautiful buildings I've personally seen, maybe anywhere.
Yeah.
So
You guys made a really good library.
it really is just it's just phenomenal, and all the landscaping on Shoal Creek, et cetera, is just fantastic. So this is basically on the right side of that bridge. It's overlooking Shoal Creek, and as you can see, it's two giant owls. These owls are fabricated with stacks of corian. Corian is this classic sort of countertop material which looks and feels like stone, and it has all these different beautiful textures. One of the reasons we brought a little sample here. One of the reasons we chose this is that it's incredibly dimensionally accurate, and you can engineer with it very specifically. It also is incredibly weather resistant. People use it for facades and so on, so it really is an ideal material for a long permanent piece. The owl and the dodecahedron that it's sitting on. A dodecahedron is a 12-sided polyhedral with regular sides and vertices. Everybody knows that, of course. And then there's the bottom is this bench. And these are three symbols that really make up the piece. The bench has a hidden interactive railing, which when you turn, spins the heads of the owls. So the railing is basically where, I would say, where the controls of office chairs are. So you can very easily lower your hand down, and your hand sort of touches the railing, and then you can spin it underneath you. So you can do this very subtly and secretly, and this is really important that we made this interaction mechanism something you can do clandestinely. We wanted, so Compellin, so why is it called Compellin's Owls? Wolfgang von Compellin was the inventor of the Mechanical Turk, which is a chess-playing robot in the 1700s. And everybody said, like, how's this possible? All we have are really wooden gears at this point. There's no way you could program a chess-playing robot. This is crazy. And it went on to beat a bunch of grandmasters, and nobody knew how he did it. Eventually it did come out that it was a person hidden inside of this box.
Small person.
But a chess master nonetheless. And we would assume when these sorts of things turn around and they're following somebody, let's say an owl is following a businessman down the street, the businessman might think, oh, is this like one of these new fancy AI things that probably has cameras in its eyes? It's tracking me. Why is it tracking me and not someone else? But really, it's just a mischievous 12-year-old. It's a local. It's somebody that knows the secret, that knows about the piece, and kind of has this interesting sort of power over the tourists. And we really wanted to provide that essence, that secret for the local community to have. So it had something, basically like that secret is important for people to create place. Like you'll want to take somebody to this if you know the secret and they don't. Like this is an interesting sort of moment. So that's why we made this sort of secret, clandestine, although it's hidden in plain sight, but you wouldn't necessarily know what to do with it, able to turn the piece. So we'll talk more about all the intricacies of this piece, but that's generally the introduction.
So that sort of begs a couple of questions of, why do we choose owls? Why is it going here? What about the Sea Home District makes this a good location for it? So for our project, we had to choose within a kind of 4-block area of the new developments going on down there of where these would be situated. But before then, we had to think about what is the role of the public within that space. I mentioned that we have, this interactivity is sort of driving our designs and our way to engage people with it. So without the public, this piece wouldn't really have much of a soul at all. It is meant to showcase the creativity of the public. It's a way for them to communicate with each other and a way for them to, interact from owl to owl. The mechanical interaction is located on one owl. So under that wheel is a drivetrain mechanism that's connected all the way up to the head, which rotates it, and also spins a motor, which drives the other one. We'll get into more of those details a little bit later. But really, we wanted something that could give people the opportunity to explore their creativity here. And, we were motivated by the creativity in Austin that we've seen so far about, keeping Austin weird was certainly an element that we wanted to retain. And so the public here was, was something that we wanted to feature, basically.
I think when the action of the piece is born from the creativity of the community, then it becomes a timeless thing. We were thinking about the technology to use in this and text messages, or then we thought this is a permanent piece, so it has to exist at least 20 years. So then we went back, we're like, what was cool 20 years ago? What was the coolest thing 20 years ago? And that was CD-ROMs. And then I was like, man, if I made a piece with a CD-ROM now, that would not seem, that's not that great. So we sort of moved away from sort of the tech that's really cool now, because in 20 years that might look ridiculous. And by giving the people a means of expression, people are always going to be interested in other people. People are going to use this differently as the ages go on, as the years go on, and that will always be interesting because it's driven from the creativity of the community. So that's important. Why here? Why here? This is good. There were a lot of things to consider about this moment in Austin. We're seeing the revitalization of downtowns everywhere. Lots of money is going into downtowns. Like in Boston, where we're from, there is an innovation district that looks very similar to what's happening now in the Seaholm district. Large skyscrapers, big glass facades are going up, and it has a lot of some of the same languages about innovation and knowledge, but it doesn't have things that Austin has really set in place, which I think has really fueled a lot of the imagery here. So the Great Streets program has a lot of beautiful imagery laid into it with the preference for trees. Trees are a huge part of the Great Streets program, so all the pavers and the trees that you see downtown are because of that. There's the theme of rivers and streams, which has been highlighted. So there's this really nice natural tack that has been infused in this really new development. And we thought that was very important to highlight that natural tack, because in Boston, we're not really getting into that. It's just kind of becoming, it's just too crystalline. And we're not really seeing enough of the natural state. And so for those reasons, we're picking the owls because of their role in this rivers and streams aesthetic. We also, you all know, in the library, there's that giant sculpture of grackles, and there's lots of birds. There's the bat. I guess the bat isn't technically a bird, but we wanted, we also liked putting in an apex predator in there to sort of watch over and be a part of this theme.
The other location preference for right here was that we really like the idea that it's a gateway. These neighborhoods are sort of being redefined right now, the Seaholm district, and sort of this new headquarters of knowledge in Austin, with Google's new location popping up and all these co-working spaces and the library. It's got this feel of a place that needs bridging between two places. And so for these owls and their specific mechanism of interaction, we wanted you to be able to see them and approach them from different areas. They are lit up at night, so you'll be able to see their glowing eyes from across the bridge, if their head's turned in the right direction, of course. And we thought that this would sort of be an iconic way to make people gather a little bit in this wider area and give them some fun as they're traversing from one part to the next.
Okay, so the first thing everybody asks is why owls? And that's a great question. For us, I think owls, the simple the simple way of saying it is owls are a symbol of knowledge for this new sort of knowledge district with the library and Google, and you feel like that you're in kind of an area of thinkers downtown there, and this is a really nice symbol that kind of captures that. But the sculpture is also made of, like I was saying, this Wolfgang von Kempelen, there's the Mechanical Turk right there, and the Dodecahedron. And these three elements co-create a narrative that talks more deeply about curiosity, about knowledge that is known and unknown. Just briefly, like a dodecahedron is a feature in a lot of our works. We really love the story of the dodecahedron. When the Greeks discovered the dodecahedron, the Pythagoreans, they hid it from the public because you can derive a rationality from its pentagonal face. And that undermined their sort of their belief that the universe can be perfectly explained through integers. And so they were also like very powerful folks in the political aspects of Greece. So there was one, what is the name? Hippasus. Hippasus was the Pythagorean that showed the dodecahedron to the public, and then he was drowned for it. So for us to show a public dodecahedron is a way of giving the knowledge back to the people. It's a symbol of sort of basically open sourcing information and revealing information. And so it's this kind of way, this sort of defiant way of talking about that. And again, it's like what, like how do you, the Greeks found this thing and they reacted with fear. And they're like, oh, we're going to hide it. But here we want people to react with curiosity. Bevan, you want to talk more about?
Yeah, so the owl itself as well has many interpretations and many symbologies in different cultures. Also alongside the Greeks, they used it as a symbol of wisdom. It is on the city coin of Athens. It's one of the symbols of Athena, goddess of wisdom and fairness. So it holds this place in our sort of collective psyche as the wise old owl, right? The bookish owl, the smart owl. In other cultures, especially Native American ones, especially ones that were originated around here, it's a symbol that's a little bit more foreboding. It can symbolize or foreshadow death or unfortunate events. And so it's because this owl has these characteristics of duality. That was another reason why we were so drawn to it. It can see in the dark. It can see things we cannot. And when you really think about those two things, death and wisdom, what you're really getting at is revealing the unknown. What more of an unknown is there than death? And these creatures can see into it. They can see into the night. And so for us, it's all about providing that symbology for curiosity. If you face the curiosity with fear, perhaps you think of it more as death, as a negative, as that side of the equation. If you face it more with curiosity, you may investigate, you may explore, you may reveal hidden truths.
We can go on and on about this, but we'll just leave it at this. Okay, so let's watch a little film about what we're doing, how we're making these. So that was all nice sort of fancy art talk, but how is this actually happening? And this is sort of the technology used in making Kempelen's owls. Why now? Bevan, why don't you start us off with this? We'll just talk over this film.
So one enormous influence in our fabrication of these pieces, which is happening right now up in Boston, is our collaboration and partnership with Autodesk. And they have an amazing facility out there called the Autodesk Build Space, where it is basically a maker space jacked up on as many steroids as you can imagine. They've got state-of-the-art equipment all over the place. They've got 7-axis robotic arms like the one that's pictured here that is going to be doing a little milling on our corian and aluminum sample. They've got a CNC robot about the size of a small room that they had to take the garage door off the hinges to get inside. They've got welding machines, they've got a water jet cutter, they've got all these tools and toys that we can play with, and that really informs our design process. So a really nice thing that this partnership has enabled is for us to really tighten up the timeline between design and conceptualization of something, the prototyping, such as you're seeing here, and the final production of that part. So we're really able to utilize these technologies to kind of exert a lot of control over this process, to keep it all in-house. We take pride ourselves in being a studio of makers and fabricators, and so we're not really farming a lot of this out, we're doing it within Autodesk.
I'm personally interested in the elements. We hear a lot about, will robots take our jobs? and we're asking, how can we get this robot to do this job? and also we're like, will specialization increase labor division? And we're asking, how can we open source this process? How can we tell people how we've done what we've done, and how can they do it the way that we've done it? We're at this moment in society, maybe every generation says this, where we are so close to the means of production. Like you can go into a makerspace, you can have something CNC'd right in front of you. And hopefully what we're doing is we're trying to democratize that process a little more, using the most high-tech stuff we can, and then trying to open source that as much as we can to show people in other fields or in other ways. No one's going to reproduce the owls. That would be impossible. But they are going to maybe use the technologies and the methods that we've come up with to do other things. I was thinking about the statement "state of the art" the other day, and I love that because that means art is like the most advanced thing. And I think for that to be true, art should be using the most advanced, current technology. And so we're really trying to push the current technology, the top of the line fabrication processes, and make that as democratic as possible. So, what does that look like? So here is an example of one of the ways we're going to open source all this material. So this is the drivetrain that basically is a DC motor connected to another DC motor, which is the sort of interesting magical trick of the two. Basically, the owl's heads turn.
So if you can see this is part of the inspiration that...
This is just a Lego motor. This is not going in the piece.
Yeah, this is your owls, everyone. This is part of the inspiration that drove the research that we were doing. Two connected DC motors, no batteries, no electricity. But when I rotate one, the other is magically rotated.
One of the things we really like about this is, right across Shoal Creek is this power plant. And Austin was one of the first cities to have their own power that wasn't owned by another entity. They had their own generators and own supply chains. And this sculpture is its own generator and own supply chain. If there was, for some reason, God forbid it, the power outage in Austin, this sculpture would still function because it's totally off the grid. I'm creating the power, and it's being used immediately on the other side. So this is basically the scaled up model that you can download online. All these pieces, all these parts. You can see exactly how we've done it. All these pieces are things that you can get off of an amazing website called McMaster. So we try to use as many off-the-shelf components as possible. And then, let's just see that animation one more time. And then you can download these plans and cut out all these things and put it together yourself. Or just use an element of it in your own project.
So this is one of those elements that Dan was mentioning that even though its applications in the future, if someone were to use this open source information, their application might not be art. But we really like the idea that art might contribute something to the fields of engineering, to the fields of science, that if you do need a standalone mechanism to generate power from one location to another, this could be it.
Right. I know this slide says open source as new media art. I don't really know what new media art is. I think one of the reasons we're doing this is I am kind of in love with the scientific process, the scientific method, and we want art to be more like science in the sense that it's just, if we have methods, and we should document those methods and have those open for other artists. Art has sort of evolved via the critique of, the rich, and well, he said this and some critic said that, and so I'm going to do this. But if art could just be like, well, they used exactly these materials, and I'm going to do it again in this way, I'm going to build on that. I just wish art was more like science and had more documentation and more sort of rigory I doubt that's a word, in its process. So I'm not really sure it's new media art. I think it's more like trying to bring the scientific principles into art practice. Okay, great. Best practices in collaborating with architects and designers. I'm not really going to sound like an artist when I say this, but I think it's important to keep in mind that the final form of the work cannot be known. And when you make changes, those changes aren't concessions. It's not like you have some artistic vision that like absolutely needs to happen that way. That's craziness. I don't think that's possible. So I think really it's a collaboration, and it's really, we're all working on methods together. And if the art is because of methods instead of because of some idea, then it doesn't matter what changes happen. Like those are all a part of the methods, and the result is a beautiful thing. So keeping that in mind, of course, lots of things need to change. Things like we needed to move the sculpture 3 feet because of a tree. That's okay. That's okay. That's not the end of the world. Or we need to change the internal structure because of engineering detail. That's also okay. So just keeping in mind that like things are going to change, and keep your eyes on the prize of like, we're going to make something beautiful in the public. People are going to come across it. They're going to be wowed. They're going to ask questions. If they're curious, they're going to find answers. Like that's the goal. So that's my personal best practices.
Yeah, and one nice thing about that process, that dialogue, is that it does work both ways a lot of times. There's sort of this conception in public art where you're the lowest on the totem pole, and that no matter what anyone says you have to do it. A lot of the times that's true. But it does reverse as well, so that if we need to request a change to part of our structure, we can call up our structural engineer here in Austin and say, hey, do you mind if we change the size of this plate a little bit as long as it has the same surface area? And they say, yeah, that's totally fine, because we have a lot of stuff going on inside the sculpture, and we work with our partners to make the best result for everybody. So I think that give and take is really important in public art, to approach it from both ends and to arrive at that non-idealized but practical form.
Yeah. Okay, we've been talking for a while, and I'm very excited to introduce you to Christine, who is our collaboration Launchpad artist. The Launchpad is a new program here in Austin, and we are sort of the guinea pigs for that program. We're very happy to be a part of it. It really, in my opinion, is the physical embodiment of our open source philosophy. So I'll just stop talking and introduce Christine.
It's so funny. This picture is never going to go away. I wish I had worn something different. It's okay. So this is me scanning the owls that were that was actually used for the model. So the sculptures that will be going in on 2nd Street is this particular owl. I got to use some fun technology. It was just structures, an adaptation for an iPad. You put it on, it scans these 3D scans and scan a room. It was just crazy technology. And Pamela Owen, who's here, was nice enough to let us borrow this owl. It's nicknamed the Watcher. I got a pep talk from Napa before going to scan this owl that is probably going to be super strict, and I'm going to have to be like arm distance to the person who is in charge of this owl, and I would have to have like security clearances. So I was really nervous. And it's just in Pamela's office on the bookshelf. I was basically prepared not to breathe on this specimen. And I got to, basically we were in her office for about 2 hours. I was expecting to be in there for 15 minutes. It was nice that I had a bunch of extra time because that scanner is a little tricky. I had to dodge another taxidermy bird that was on the wall. So this fascinator photo that appears everywhere for Launchpad promotion it's a turkey tail in my face. But this was kind of the first assignment that I had with Launchpad. I got to visit Boston. I got to go see Napa at Autodesk, which was incredible. Some higher security there. And I also just kind of serve as a liaison for this project in Austin. The guys are in Boston. I initially was really involved with getting contractors on board and working with the city, working with Marjorie. And I got to do some very strange things. I had to give a talk on behalf of Napa a couple of months ago at this point, so it's nice to just be able to sit here and listen to them do it. I had to learn how to intelligently talk about a DC motor in a room full of people who knew what I was talking about. So it was hard. No, it was good. I've got to meet some really interesting people. I've gotten to meet some really interesting artists, and working with NAPA has been really good. This is the whole Launchpad. The purpose of it is to help emerging artists gain some professional experience and what it's like to handle a commission like this and what goes into it, and working with tons of stakeholders and the public. And yeah, so it's just been a really interesting experience. I've done a small commission. I was a tempo artist a couple of years ago with my partner, and this budget scale and this permanence, and it's a completely different ballgame. So it's fun to have frontline exposure.
So this owl, as you mentioned, is very important to us to take a piece of Austin as the source material for this work. We could have downloaded an owl online somewhere, but it was important for us that the owl is a local owl that comes from this area, and then, so we have this sort of like very staunch, this is what it's going to be like, and then we look up and we're like, well, it's a felony to own an owl unless you're an educational institution, and we just absolutely lucked out that this owl did exist at UT Austin, and Pamela Owen, the associate director of the museum there, happened to have it above her desk and was amiable for us to scan it. And so this owl exists here in Austin, and you can go see it if you make an appointment with Pamela. Yeah, so we're just very happy that this is an object of that is born in Austin and is a part of Austin, and it actually still exists here. And this is our last slide. This is sort of talk about what's on the horizon. This is sort of like our ridiculous quote about interactivity, which we're still working on. If you have any suggestions how we should simplify that, I would love to know. What's next after this project? Well, we have a lot of ideas.
It's kind of hard to think that far
We might
ahead.
want to. We're going to get an intern from France as a product designer to work on a new, direction of kind of a transformable chair object. We'll just see where that goes. We also got a commission with the city of Boston to make a giant radio. So a huge radio that is actually just a big radio with a huge dial you can turn, and people can sort of fight over what station they want to hear. We got a hilarious question from the city being like, so how are you going to source the material for the radio? And we were like, well, it's the radio. And then we also have another commission maybe next winter for a new building going up in East Boston. We're sort of playing around with ideas of side globe, fiber optic cable, et cetera. Basically using things that we've learned from this project to really enhance the next few.
Yeah, and yeah, go ahead, clap. Yeah, that's it. Thank you all very much for your time and patience during that first segment. And now I believe we get to answer a couple questions, right?
Yes, it's time for interrogation.
All right.
Cool, this
buckle
should be the
in.
fun stuff. We don't have any more slides.
It's always exciting to have, I think the Art in Public Places program does a great job. I'd encourage everybody, if you don't know, to kind of explore the collection, to kind of see what's out there. Again, it's a 2% for art, which is very unusual if you're not familiar with the public art program. Many cities have percent for art programs, so it means that if there's a capital campaign and there's a $100 million capital project going, 1% of that will go towards some kind of public artwork, and many cities have it. I mean, New York City has a public art project. Boston does not, right? Seattle does. There are also public art programs for large infrastructural projects. For instance, we're working on one for the Purple Line project, which is a new light rail line outside of Washington, D.C., where they've selected 37 different artists there. So it's an interesting thing. There's a lot of it's an interesting way to support the arts. There's a lot of money that is coming in to kind of support the arts. And again, in Austin, it's really staggering to see the amount of money and potential there is with the projects, and to kind of explore those as they're coming online. As a former Art in Public Places panelist, I will say if you're interested, the panel meetings are open to the public. If you're interested in a project, please come out. I was always surprised at how few people would come. It's like, we have $1.5 million project we're discussing here. Please come out and let your voice be heard and kind of participate in that. What I wanted to ask you first was, and again, with these public art projects, I mean, there's substantial budgets. This is a $337,000 budget. And it's an interesting thing. Like, we work in an artist collective. That's a very specific thing. You all are an artist collective. You see over, the 60s art collective were hot. I think it was like the hippie thing, right? Getting together and making things. But in public art in particular, it seems that even if you're a singular, like traditional studio artist doing a public artwork, there may be 10, 30, 50 people that are touching the piece, between fabricators, engineers. You're getting a lot of people involved. So even if it appears if there's a singular person behind it, there really is a kind of collective behind making that happen. And I wanted you to maybe explain a little bit more the nature of your collective, how it came about. I thought it was really super interesting and curious that there doesn't seem to be an artist in your collective, and you're doing public art. My sister is a visual artist, read your website, I was like, there's no artist here. Who are these people? But if you could, I don't know, I'm just curious.
How you define artists.
But talk a little bit more about like your backgrounds, engineering, architecture, that sort of thing, and how, and I'm just curious, like, when you decided, like, why on earth would you start tackling public art? Like, where that came from the beginning?
That's a great question. Part of me just wants to argue the devil's advocate that we have nothing to do with art at all. But let's see, my background, my grandfather was a public artist in the Pacific Northwest, Richard Beyer, and he did a number of aluminum works in Seattle, et cetera. And so I was around the foundries, in that. My father, he took a sort of left turn and wanted to invent hovercrafts. And so I spent most of my youth growing up in the shop, sort of figuring out different ways of putting hovercraft skirts together and the powers of fans and motors, et cetera. And then I went to school for sociology and multimedia, which back then was how to make a really cool CD-ROM. And those two, sociology and multimedia, sort of led me down the path of being an ad guy in marketing for a number of years. But I never quite got over the fact that I really liked to have my hands in things and to be in shops and to be building things. And I kind of got my start in public art, I think, making treasure hunts for my friends, thinking about, you sort of glue some ridiculous puzzle to the bottom of a park bench, and then, you see a group of friends come up and they just have to figure it out, and they have to use the key that they got from the mailbox, etc. And that really, it really hit all the sociological aspects that I was looking for, and it's kind of a natural progression into public art, especially with the engineering side of it. I guess I would say now I'm more or less a sociologist with engineering problems, and I just definitely do a lot of art. I think I really don't know what art is. I think I like to consider myself as an artist. I know Bevan has a different idea, which is great, which is why we're collaborative. But I think I call myself an artist when I'm just completely embarrassed about the amount of time I've spent on something. It's like, it's like really late at night and you're like folding origami vigorously and you think, you get really self-conscious all of a sudden and you're like, oh, why am I doing this? This will never amount to anything. And then I say, that's okay, you're an artist. Like, you can do this, it'll be all right. So that's
an excuse.
I totally use it as an excuse.
Totally frivolous things.
Just to look at something intensely is really the only is as far as an artist as I am.
For me, my interest in making stuff began at a very early age, and I continued that in college, where I got a degree in engineering and also in visual art. So if the degree means anything,
All right.
that's
So you
debatable.
You
Got one of them.
Check the box.
But one thing I was just perennially disappointed about in our engineering program, which was very theoretical, was that we had very little hands-on practical fabrication experience. There was one machine shop class you could take, and it met at 7 in the morning, and it was taught by the machinist Ray, who had been there for about 50 years, and would teach you anything, but only on his terms. So I found that I was learning more about how things actually fit together in my art classes that had a very finite deliverable at a certain amount of time that had to stand up, function, and perform in the real world. So I liked those two aspects interplaying with each other. After college, I got a pretty run-of-the-mill engineering job and was bored out of my mind for a little while. And then the company folded, and I had a lot of free time in my hands to figure out what else I wanted to do. And that happened to coincide with the maker movement and maker spaces becoming a thing, and technology and machining and all that kind of stuff really being democratized and available and accessible to the common person like me. So I learned a lot of those trades just through classes and activities there. And that's also where I ran into Dan for the first time.
That was like a maker space, sort of.
We were competitors at a meeting of the minds.
Yeah.
And we were the youngest folks in the room at the time, and we definitely looked at each other and being like, I have to keep my eye on that guy.
Right.
So the best thing, know your enemy better than your friends. So we helped each other out on a few projects. I helped him install something in a park, and he helped me sneak a sculpture into the Harvard library.
And that's when we realized we had a lot of similar interests, despite our rivalry. So we decided to team up, and Dan had proposed this idea of a collective or an organization or co-op or whatever you want to call it, to sort of unite our banner under. And we wanted to make things. That was the common thread. And we didn't really care that it wasn't one of our names. In fact, we liked the idea that the anonymity of a group sort of gave us a little bit more power and a little bit more authority. And so we found a couple other folks that had similar interests, and eventually ended up forming a company to do this stuff after a couple of collaborations got bigger and bigger and the budgets got bigger and bigger. And we had just sort of informally rode that train for a while. We all had side gigs that we put aside to come together when a project came in the door. And within the past, I'd say 2 years or so, those became frequent enough for a few of us to come on full time and make it our basically dream job.
So you have day jobs.
This is our day job.
This is
We finally become
That's awesome.
able to
Right.
pay ourselves enough to do
And,
this full time.
and we found that that's kind of what's required to make work
Right.
of this scale, is that full dedication.
So you have a studio shop space, and you try to self-reflect, make everything yourselves.
Yeah, we hire
It's-
ourselves as fabricators as much
Okay.
as we can when time allows and all that kind of thing.
So I'm curious, again, it looks like you're involved in a lot of different things. I know on your website, interactive design and lighting design, and I know that to kind of make ends meet, it's important, or maybe just philosophically to work in a lot of different venues. But we do live in an era where it seems like more and more professions and occupations are siloed, right? Public artist, lighting designer, interactive designer, there's kind of these neat boxes, which is a curious thing. I think the complexity of the world is such that maybe there is a knowledge base that requires you to have so specific. It seems like the ethos in while you're trying to create something where you're truly crossing over disciplines. Everyone always says interdisciplinary, but if you're being hired as a lighting designer, and then as a public art project, they're very different. Those are truly separate disciplines. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that, are you focusing solely on public artwork now, or are you doing these other pieces that would, traditionally be in a different discipline, I guess, would be the question. As a business model, I'm just curious.
Figuring out what the business model for public art is something that I'm very interested in figuring out.
So as a trajectory, you'd like to just solely do the public artwork and not do some of the other,
But I think to say, if somebody hired us for a lighting design job that was on the exterior of a public building,
right.
In my opinion, I mean that's a public art job.
Right.
They just think of it as a lighting design job, but we would bring all of our talents and expertise in the same way. And they might think of it as something else, but for us, it seems like public art to
Did you
me.
find, I mean, this is a challenge in, how you ran your stuff?
It is absolutely like who's going to our site, like how do we, like who knows about us and all that stuff. Like it is a challenge for sure.
And I think it plays into how we define ourselves as well. You asked before, like, are we artists or what? I would say that art is something that, this is personally, something that I do, but it's not someone that I am.
Right.
And so when asked, like, what do you do? What's your company do? It's easier for me to frame it in terms of what we do rather than who we are.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from the audience? Anybody?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for being here. I'm curious in the collaborative side of it. When you work in a new place, how often do you collaborate with people who know what happened there before? Before you put in something that's a symbolism, how well do you know this place, which has the same history for Boston that Boston Harbor has for Boston? How much time did you spend on researching that?
So I think those are kind of two different questions, like how much time do we spend researching and who did we talk to? So for who do we talk to, we really wanted to take a temperature of like what is the scene in Boston right now. We reached out to like the maker spaces where we constantly are reaching out to basically anybody in the space of anybody that has like a 3D printer, anybody that would be mildly interested in what this is, and to hear about their story here. How did they get started here? What would they find interesting in the piece changes the way we would design and show the piece. So we really wanted to just make as many connections as possible to talk about the technology we're doing and how that's applicable to the environment here. As for history, I mean, yes, absolutely, we research things. I think AIPP is a great resource of like basically starting with priming the pump for us. And they have some criteria about like, for this project they didn't want any stars and guitars, which is like, I totally understand. Like we want to reinvent the way and the symbols of a city. So we sort of steer away from that, and we focus more on the environment, the other themes that are going on with the architects, with the streets. Like I was mentioning, the rivers and streams theme is something that we sort of dug in and found was a part of this plan.
I think it also depends on what the nature of the piece as intended to be from all of our partners and stakeholders and everyone, what the mission is. We did some work in Camden, New Jersey, by contrast, which was a piece that was much more focused on the narrative of people living there. Has anyone heard of Camden, New Jersey? What have you heard? Good things, bad things? Bad things, right. So Camden has a reputation problem that part of our project was meant to try to remedy. There was sort of a Say Something Nice About Camden campaign, and there was also a project that we did, which was to elevate the voices of local people in this project. So this was sort of an interactive, mirrored space that you would step into, and doing so would trigger an audio story to be played. So those were their voices telling their stories about their history in Camden. And in that context, it made a lot of more sense for that project to do a deep dive into those individuals. Whereas this one was less focused on historical trends, more on sort of the future and the questions that it bring in and the themes that are already there in sort of this developing district.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was going to ask, what is your favorite AutoCAD program to use for projects like this? And do you foresee working in Boston again?
Great. I mean, so we're doing everything right now in Fusion 360.
Just start with Fusion.
Good choice. Yes.
Great. I think this is a great question, very nerdy question, fantastic. The big choice was like, are we going to do it in? Sorry, now I'm blanking.
SolidWorks.
SolidWorks.
Yeah.
SolidWorks, which is the competitor, or Fusion 360. SolidWorks is very expensive, only runs on PCs, whereas Fusion.
It's cheap.
Yeah.
Fusion's
$0 is cheap.
But it's just as good, and it has the incredible web viewer that you saw there with the transmission exploding. Like that's an online portal that anybody can access, and anybody can download that part, and so it solves a lot of the open source problems. But as we've dived into it, it's been it's been a great parametric software. And, you know, like anything, you just have to get to learn all the little ends, you know, things like that. If you're interested, we can definitely share some of the Fusion files that we've made already. And, you know, speeds and feeds. It has, I'm getting really nerdy, it has integrated cam, which is fantastic. So you can see immediately, you've designed the piece, then you basically open up another side program in there that shows the drill cutting out your piece. So you know exactly what the piece is going to look like, which is invaluable.
And you can-
pivot points, it'll animate it.
Yeah.
And you can make changes in your model and have the cam update immediately. So it's a really powerful thing to, as I mentioned before, have that tight handhold with design and fabrication.
You don't work for Autodesk, you just,
I know.
we just did a little pitch here.
And
Basically just, you know, taking a stab in the dark, which
Yeah.
AutoCAD's probably going to teach
Yeah.
myself,
Yeah.
so.
I've tried.
Based on your feedback, you might just commit.
And to quickly answer the second part of your question, so far we've loved working in Austin. Every time we come here is a treat, and we would love to do so again.
We had
I work for
another,
a fabrication company, so if you ever need
Okay.
some service.
All right.
Connect.
we had another question on
You had a question about the AutoCAD partnership you guys had?
Yes.
So besides the software that you're using, like how is that and so how does that work? Like as far as the space and what's the
Yeah.
exchange, I guess?
So Autodesk has a program that they run of their own volition called the Autodesk Build Space Residency, which they open up to people working in the architecture, engineering, and construction fields, which, you know, I guess we fit somewhere in that niche, to spend a residency term there working on a specific project if they think that it'll interplay well with their mission and their goals. I think for them it's a chance to incubate interesting new projects that are using their tools and software in new ways. You know, we sort of push the limits of their software, making something this complex. So they definitely receive benefit from working with us and testing out those limits. We applied to their residency program with this project in hand, and we were accepted to it to do all the fabrication there.
And this is in Boston, not in San Francisco.
Correct, yeah, they have Pier 9 in San Francisco, which is a residency more focused on traditional visual arts, but with their modern twist on it. This one is more AEC stuff.
a question back here.
Thanks for sharing your project. I was curious if you could speak more to the process of engaging the local public in the creation of this project, and like how are you defining community here in Austin? Because as we know, it's drastically changing. And what neighborhood or communities were you able to reach out to in that process? And how did you handle the input in the development of this project to ensure? And like I think too, like you know, the past and the history was brought up, which I think is really important. But also, like as you talk about the future through technology, how are you engaging that this project represents the values of a future of a diverse, or like enabling that input to be part of your process?
Those are great questions. I think those are definitely questions that should be asked of all public art projects, especially ones that are, you know, taking in 2% of a giant budget. So let's move backwards through that. So let's think about the future. So we talked a little bit about why we didn't include CD-ROMs and whatnot, because that'll sort of age badly. But also, this is the sculpture. The soul of the sculpture is the movement of these heads, being able to watch people. And anybody can use the sculpture. And as the community around the sculpture changes, the way the community uses the sculpture will change. And you know, hopefully, when I say community here, I mean, you know, a community of people that know the secret of the sculpture and a community of people that don't. And ideally, that creates, because it's sort of a hidden interactive feature, that creates kind of a tension between those two communities, and it connects those two communities. So somebody that knows how to use the sculpture and spooks someone else, that person will be like, oh, who did that? Like, how's this possible? And maybe those two people will start to talk. So hopefully this will begin to connect people with each other through the act of surprise. And ideally creating a more people who are in the know. Moving backwards from there, talking about reaching out. So, like I said, we drove around. We looked up all the different maker spaces here in Austin, and you know, we went into like the beautiful toy store there, Toy Joy, down the street, and talked to those guys about the sculpture and showed them some things, being like, hey, you know, would you guys want some 3D prints or something to sell, or just, you know, whatever, like just going in and finding interesting people, and are they interested in this project? Do they want to like be a part of it or do an event? Like, who knows what. Also, you know, we talked to a lot of architects just about it. And I think it's just important to just hit the streets. Who's gonna interact with it? Like, who are the restaurants nearby? What do they think about it? A lot of people are just like, that's great, cool. Like, and it acts more like an icon of placemaking, because it's very easy to say, meet me at the owls. The symbol of an owl is just very repeatable, and so that has this kind of social fluidity that creates place. Who else did we reach out to?
I want to just quickly add 2 more points to that, and then we can go to the next question. One huge reason is Christine, our Launchpad artist here in Texas, in Austin, has been invaluable in sort of making those relationships and bridging those communities. One example of which is Maker Faire in Austin, which is happening, I think, May 5th and 6th.
Right.
We're going to be bringing some materials down, and thanks to Christine's outreach there, have a presence and be able to have some of this demonstration material on hand, and also hopefully reach some educational communities and sort of begin that process as well, which ties into my next point, which I think is very valuable from our perspective, is open sourcing all of this information forms a larger community of people interested in making, interested in learning. The fact that we have these resources available means that, you know, little sculptures of this could be created, learning about the mechanisms and the electricity generation and all of this can sort of serve that educational mission by the fact that we're not siloing this information, that we want to share it, that we're actively sharing it, and that we have these resources available to everybody.
I wanted to ask if I understood correctly. I know that it turns, but can you turn it yourself from outside if I went there?
Yes, absolutely.
And where would that turn? Where would I touch it to turn it?
So there's a little hidden railing right about here underneath the bench. So if I kind of reach down and spin that wheel, and that bench, here, I'll give you this as an example since you asked the question. That railing is going to look like that, so that's the part you'd grab onto. Go ahead, you can grab it.
Okay.
So you would go to there and grab that and spin it, and that would link mechanically to the owl that you were seated at, and it would make the motor turn on the owl that was across from you.
So it's basically that silver part right there.
In the picture, yes.
In the picture.
Yeah.
Yes, in real life it'll be that white handrail that you're holding right there.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes.
I'll go check it out.
Cool.
So also, guys, we kind of want to keep this a secret. Okay.
How many more questions do we have time for?
Let's do 1 or 2 more questions.
Okay, great.
I have a quick one, which is just what's the timeline on installation?
Targeting July.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes it.
Since there are so many advanced machining tools and software that individuals can easily get a hold of and get proficient at, what would you tell your younger, new to public art brother, knowing that, like, see, you don't have to how to, like, now, I can go cut stuff on a water jet overnight, and like, what would you say to the individual who is decidedly not a collective and has the power of, you do research, you do material research, you talk to people, what would, any things there?
I think the hardest thing for us is sort of the meta level of how do we keep doing this work and how do we keep having access to these tools and this knowledge and how do we, justify teaching ourselves these new tricks? So finding a framework or building a framework for your little brother, for our friend, to be in a position to be able to do that continuously. So it's less about mastering any certain technique or fabrication methodology. It's more about, like, is it a business? Is it a grad program? Is it a collective that is funded somehow? Like, really figuring out those other elements of keeping that machine going are so critical to building a life doing that work.
One more question?
Really quickly, I was curious about the exterior material that it's going to be made out of.
Yeah, so that is a mixture of aluminum and
You
corian.
did say that.
No, it's okay. We can get into a little more detail. So these stacks here are varied layers of different colors of corian and aluminum, which are going to be milled into that faceted surface that you see, which sort of reflects the digital qualities of the owl scan going through that polygonization process, which is very in vogue for 3D printing and for all kinds of representing organic objects in a digital way. So we'll have that faceted, textured surface on the outside.
Corian is a fantastic material that is, incredibly robust and dimensionally accurate. And it's been really a joy to work with. And also from a of course we have to think about this from a vandal point of view. If anything were to happen, you can clean it with normal solvents, and then if anything just catastrophic were to happen, like baseball bat style, you can just get a countertop guy to fix it.
It doesn't get hot. Oh.
And it doesn't get hot. True. There you go.
It's
Very important in Texas.
So, yeah.
Okay, two more, one in the backpack, and then
I was just curious, what would you say your biggest challenge has been in this particular project?
Good question. It's a really good question.
Yeah. They're all of them. There are so many. I don't even know where to begin. Technically, we started with the concept of a Lego motor and figured out how to scale that up into something that works mechanically, reliably, repeatably in the real world. So those were certainly numerous, but that was more like in our wheelhouse of challenges we're used to dealing with. What would you say yours is?
I think there's kind of there's a budgetary payment schedule that is particularly, it's set up through, I think, like the city. It's not even an AIPP thing. That basically means that all the materials need to be bought with like 20% of the budget, which is very difficult to figure out how to handle that. So some very creative thinking needs to kind of deal with that. I think early on I was really worried about open sourcing this whole thing, and I thought it was going to be a challenge to kind of talk about that, especially from a contractual standpoint with the city. And we had multiple conversations with AIPP about the contract, and that was challenging. But I think we're both very happy to have included. I think for the first time in a public art contract at all, that the open source is built into the contract itself. So from a legal contractual standpoint, all of this information has to be under a Creative Commons license. So
if San Antonio built them.
if San Antonio could do this, amazing.
There's the possibility and then the practicality.
They made it so hard to make. Someone would have to be crazy.
But if they did this, also it's a share alike license, so that means they have to give credit to basically the people that started it, which is
in the city of Austin. Yeah.
Christine, do you want to name a challenge also?
I don't know if I have really run into any particular issues that have been very difficult. I know that I had about 20 panic attacks at Autodesk just seeing how technical this sculpture is and how technical it's gotten. I think that it gets more complicated every time these guys wake up. So I guess I would say I'm relieved that I don't share that burden. Yeah, and then as far as working with the city and contractors and architects and designers, I have some experience with that, but the conversation is different. So kind of just learning the language and learning what's appropriate and what isn't, and who I should be talking to about this. And so I don't know if there's anything in particular. It's just the same old navigation challenges when you take on something new, and I've been learning as I go. And like you were asking about, how do you start in public art, and basically one problem just keeps going to your next step, and you just keep going.
Thanks.
It hasn't dissuaded you from wanting to do bigger.
No, but it definitely has me thinking about things differently. Like when I was in Boston, we did spend some time looking at material and the technology, but I feel like where I was probably most aggressive was business model. Like, what does this look like? So the more that I learn, the more complicated that gets, and the more nebulous and gray, and it's just like becomes this. It's not a neat, tidy package, and not like being an artist would be, but not dissuaded quite yet. Just thinking about it. just thinking about it much differently, and approaching things differently, and looking at even potential calls differently, and what budget is worth pursuing. Even though I've had one tiny contract, money evaporates, and lots of things come up. So. I don't know. I think just these little challenges have given me a different perspective, and I love talking to people about getting involved with public arts, and I kind of want to talk to you about it.
Wonderful, thanks. Okay, last one.
I have an art question. Could you address why they are striped differently?
Oh, fantastic. Oh, somebody's really looking.
Yeah.
That's great. Absolutely. So we brought a design book that really goes through the super details of why we made every single aesthetic decision, which please feel free to look at it. It's on the table here after this. But just briefly, we took a photograph of the owl, the watcher, that is in UT Austin. We took a single line of pixels and stretched it out to look at kind of the general aesthetic of those colors, and that basically set our palette, which you see here. And then we really wanted to give them two different personalities, and this really, as Bevan likes to talk about, heightens the duality. And you can see the one on the left has got a dark band across its eyes, which kind of gives it this, I don't know, like a more foreboding sense. And so maybe this one is slightly more symbolizing death than the other. And the other has more of a white band across its eyes, and it's a little bit more wise. And so we really want to kind of just by the colors alone separate and kind of heighten that duality to talk about the two different ways that owls have been represented in myth. And that's a very deep dive, subtle thing. Thank you for noticing.
Okay. Oh, one more.
I'd like to ask this question. I know you say that it's made from the corian.
Corian.
Is there any wood that's holding any of that up, or it's just completely corian?
There is no wood in this sculpture.
So there's a lot of internal structure which supports everything, and lets us take a section out if we ever needed to, and supports all the other elements of it. But that's all going to be stainless steel. The timeline goal for this project was, it's got to last at least 20 years. That's the mark of permanence for interactive art like this, and so we definitely got all the materials to do that. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you like wood, there's no wood in it.
Oh, I just was wondering what was keeping it all up.
Yeah, there's a very intricate internal stainless steel frame.
Awesome.
And so architects in the audience worried about galvanic corrosion, we have taken steps to isolate the stainless steel and the aluminum.
And if you want to really take a look at it, feel free to take that link that we'll post and kind of slide the explosion of the model so you can see all the pieces inside.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
You bet.
Thanks.
Okay, so I wanted to, one more time, thank Texas Society of Architects, our partners for tonight. I also wanted to remind you if you could fill out your survey and leave it by the door. And also, our next lecture will be on April 10th with local artist Bailey Luz, so please come back out for that one.
And there's
Thank you all for coming. There's more refreshments.